I want to, before we start talking about some of these things that we'll be talking about today, I want to be very clear that these are very emotional subjects. And I think you, as an expert in some of the research that you've done, and that was particularly involved in this Washington Post piece recently, I think even you've commented that it was some of the hardest research that you've done in your career. So
yes.
In order to have this conversation, I think both of us are going to have to be a bit detached from the subjects that we'll be talking about. But before we do that, I just want to recognize the horrors of war, how policy using armed weapons sometimes goes awry, and that I think I can speak for us both, me particularly, and I know that you, from things you've said, express condolences and sadness for the losses that are involved in this particular event that we'll be talking about today.
Yes, I completely agree.
So could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your connection at the Institute and the James C. Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, please?
Sure. So I'm a scientist in residence. So my name is Ferenc Dalnoki Veress. It's a horribly long name, but just Ferenc will work. I'm a scientist in residence at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies, and I work on issues related where science intersects with policy related to nuclear nonproliferation. So that has everything to do with emerging technologies, nuclear weapons, missiles are also my interest, robotics, all kinds of topics that interest me. But also I'm interested in things like events like this case here with this horrible incident that happened in Kabul.
Let's talk specifically about that. So the Washington Post, I believe, reached out to you with some material for you to examine. Was it photographs and videos that the Post had?
Yes, tons of photographs and videos, really gory ones, and it was really hard to spend so much time. I was always also doing this late at night because of my other obligations and work, which makes it more difficult to do the work. But it was so it was mostly analysis of videos and of the damage that was done from the missile strike and all the images. One of the most jarring images for me or videos was immediately after the scene when I looked at the Corolla that was hit, that people were desperately trying to stop the fire from spreading, and you could actually see that one of the lights was on, which made it even airier, if there is such a word. Yeah, it was a very, very difficult thing to do. And so just for example, like, if we're analyzing pictures related to North Korea or something, then we will look at different corners of the images and of the videos and so on to get clues about how big things are and things like that. And this time it was a little different. I mean, it was hard to see past some of the horrible images, even though I was focusing on the damage, the physical damage to the environment, to the the buildings and everything else around it. It was hard not to see some of those horrible images.
And their journalism going on, this reporting was during the American withdrawal from Afghanistan and some of the last days of the withdrawal. And there was an armed strike that experts believed, or military consultants had believed, was going to stop what could have been an attack that would have taken the life of Afghan soldiers and American soldiers that were helping protect people that were going to the airport during those last chaotic days. And there was a claim from the government that this was a strike that stopped some of that damage and carnage that would have gone. However, your research showed that was not the case.
Yes, that's exactly right. They called it, I think, Joint Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, said it was a righteous strike early on. But as soon as I looked at the damage, because the whole point is that there were supposedly extra explosives that would have been delivered to bomb inside the car itself. And when you analyze the missile strike and the damage that it did, it wasn't enough to indicate that there was a second explosive, that it was a really large explosive force. So there was no secondary explosives. So normally, if this would be, if there would have been secondary explosives, which the US military did indicate there was, then the damage would be far worse than it was. So for example, I don't want to get into all the gory detail stuff, but I could, it's not hard to tell if you look at these images that you could see that the wall right beside where the Toyota, that was the white car that was hit, you could see that that was that the wall itself was not severely damaged, which you would have expected if it would have been a serious blast wave. You have to kind of step back a little bit, if you don't mind. Like if you think about the damage, which you measure in terms of pressure that you feel at a certain standoff distance from where a bomb explodes, that falls off as the cube of the distance away. So it falls off pretty fast. And so if you think about this, if you think about light falls off as the square of the distance. In this case, it falls out as the cube of the distance, the effect that you feel. So it means that pretty close by, you should have seen, and I did this calculation quantitatively, you should have seen much higher damage than you actually did. So I analyzed things like, how many windows are broken and all this kind of stuff, and how far away it was using, using satellite imagery and things like that. And you could tell that the explosive wasn't as severe as the military said it was. It was consistent with a Hellfire missile strike. And that was really, so that went against, let's put it this way, that went against what the military was saying. When I realized that was quite a moment, I can tell you that.
So journalists it's not a gotcha thing. They're reporting. They're trying to find some facts. Absolutely. They're looking at a story and they're just trying to get to what, a version of the truth. And that's why they brought you in for this work.
Yeah, they're an amazing team, the visual forensics team at Washington Post. It's such a privilege to work with them. They're really very impressive in their professionalism, and they're interested in finding out what actually happened, and their critique of my work as well, which is exactly how they should be. So I was very impressed.
This also is in the United States. There's your work, and the work of the James Martin Center is to sort of hold people in authority accountable for their choices, to look at some of those things. Is that a unique position in the world that we're able to say to the government and to the armed forces, like, you were misled, and to have this information be shared throughout our communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's special. It's also amazing that we live in a country, and there's many other countries around the world where you can actually do that. But there are countries where you can't. And so it's important for us to take that role with open source intelligence and so on, to be able to do those assessments and hold everybody accountable for this, especially the people in power. The slogan is truth to power. Well, in this case, it actually was that way, and it's important that we continue this kind of work, whether it's some incident like this were conventional issues, but it could be related to missile proliferation or related to nuclear weapons and all the amazing work my colleagues do here at the center.
I want to touch on that really quickly, because that's a big important part of your work, is the students that work at the center, the researchers that you work with. This is a great example of how you can do this work that you do for others and then bring it into the classroom. Is there a bridge there? Will you be teaching these efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, my plan is to, because I teach a course called Science for Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies. And what I'm going to do is going to bring this analysis that I did with the Washington Post into the classroom, as part of a kind of an exercise that they're going to do. They don't know that yet, but that's what they're going to be doing. And I'll be careful not to include really gory pictures. But I think it's important that they get a sense, and also a sense of empowerment, that they can actually do these kinds of analysis. So normally what you would do, I usually do two things, which is one thing like this, where you would analyze the scene afterwards of an explosion. But then the other thing that I do is I look at another way of doing this measurement, which is looking at the size of the fireball. So if an explosion happens, you get a big fireball. You know, in case of nuclear explosion, it's a very big fireball. But in case of conventional explosion, you also get big fireballs. Like think about the Beirut explosion a few years ago. So you get this large fireball, and based on the size of that fireball and the distance you're away, and also with sound and so on of the explosion, you can get a sense at how big the explosion was. So that's the kind of stuff that they'll be doing in my class. So absolutely, I bring that into my teaching.
Does that help mitigate some of the emotional trauma from this work, knowing that you're working with the next generation of people to hopefully make the world a more peaceful place in the future?
Oh, that's absolutely, it does that. My feeling is always, when it comes to students, I really want to, I use the word again, empower them to feel, because some of the students, they are truly amazing, right? They're truly amazing students, but they haven't seen science in a long time. And sometimes they even choose, policy because they didn't want to do science, but then they discover that they're really good at this. And then they'll go, for example, and join other classes and join the work that my colleague Jeffrey Lewis is doing and others. And they see it, they they blossom in this amazing field, and they're able to figure out things. And one of my colleagues, who's now one of my colleagues, was a former student, and he is just brilliant at how he's able to what he can see in images and videos that I can't see. And they're sponge for information related to open source intelligence. It's really impressive. For sure, it also helps in the emotional part of it. Working on nuclear weapons is already tough enough, but then working conventional, it's a little different.
How do you unwind from that work? How do you separate yourself from knowing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, there are bad actors out there that want to hurt people? It's your job to study this and stop it from happening. But how do you unplug?
I don't unplug. Yeah, that's the unfortunate truth. And I think all of my colleagues are the same. It's difficult to unplug from that. Certainly my son helps with that, who doesn't know anything about this and won't know until I'm trying to prevent him from knowing too much about the scary stuff that we work on and things like that. I think that helps. I do also many other topics that are a little bit more removed. The stuff that I work on with another project on anti-neutrinos is a little different, and it's not so much really related to nuclear weapons as it is for detecting nuclear reactors. So yeah, I mean, but unplugging, I don't think we ever really do that. Maybe we go on vacations
and find a time to at least get some distance from that.
So much is happening every day. It's just, for example, North Korea and Iran and so little progress sometimes it feels like you're making, So I think I can speak to a lot of people that unwinding is not something that's so easy to, unplugging is not so easy to do. Maybe unwinding is listening to music, that kind of stuff, reading other stuff. I watch Korean dramas. I have to admit that.
That is a nice escape.
So that's an escape. That's Korean historical dramas. That's what I watch, or even more fluffy ones.
We'll get a list of recommendations from you that people might enjoy. Are you hoping, just a couple more questions. One of the last ones is, I'm assuming the work that you're doing now is to make sure that people don't have to do this work in the future. Will there be a time when humanity is at peace?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I really hope so. I hope so. To be very honest, when I see how the pandemic is evolving, it doesn't give me much hope. So, for example, what I often talk about is what I hoped would kind of shake the world in some sense was the work that was done in 2009, where they looked at the effect of a small nuclear exchange of nuclear weapons. That was between Pakistan and India. So small nuclear exchange means, I think, 50 nuclear weapons on one side, 50 nuclear weapons on the other side. And they looked at kind of the climatic effects of that, what the effect would be on the Earth, on the Earth's climate. And what you find is that the effect is dramatic. The effect is really dramatic. Rapid drop in temperature. Crops can't grow to maturity. Mass starvation globally. It's really, really dramatic. And I kind of hoped that would kind of shake people up, to have kind of a shared responsibility for what the effect, knowing what the effect is. Everybody has a stake in it. So it's not just India and Pakistan's problem if there is an exchange of nuclear weapons. It's everybody's problem because everybody is affected. And I always felt that when I look at this, I think one of the things is that there would be hoarding of food by countries that have the capability to hoard the food for their populations. And I kind of looked at this and I said, well, I hope that humanity would not be like that, but what I see now, and I know some of my colleagues disagree with that, but I see now is with the pandemic, I saw a lot of hoarding of the vaccines. And so I don't have a very good, sorry to be so pessimistic, but a very good sense of how humanity will handle this. Because I think they've made a lot of mistakes in terms of how the pandemic has moved or has evolved. And so I don't have so much faith right now, at least, in how this will be handled. That's not too pessimistic or dark, but if you ask me that question, and then looking at nature documentaries and seeing how much fighting there is in the natural world, it's just, I just hope that nuclear weapons will be at least abolished in the future. But in terms of peace, I just hope that we get there. But I think humanity's got a lot of growing up to do when we see how we handled the vaccines situation. That's, sorry for the dark negative.
I think that's very honest and thoughtful answer from a person who is an expert in this field. As we wrap up today, and again, thank you for taking some time today, I want to bring it back to the very personal, heartbreaking research and forensic work that you did that was described in the Washington Post story. Does it anger you? What would you like to say to policymakers who may face choices like this in the future?
You know what? I tweeted right afterwards, or, I think it was probably when the Washington Post article was out. I feel so sorry for Mr. Ahmadi and the loss of 10 people of his family. I feel terribly sorry that this happened. I also feel sorry for the decision maker who made that decision, who has to live with this for the rest of his life. So personally, I see this as I feel bad for everybody who's involved. This is the fog of war. That's not an excuse. That should be a calling for us to stop this kind of these kinds of actions, and this over the horizon technique it sounds good over the horizon, but this kind of proves that it probably won't work. And you know, as long as we have these killer drones out there, you know, it'll never be a fair playing field, and you know, we're going to get into incidents like this.
Thank you. It's a lot to think about, and really thank you for the work that you do to help make a more peaceful and prosperous world for the future.
Thank you for including me.